My name is Gunnar. I work for Salesforce, and today with me is Wayne Beaton, a very good friend and colleague working at the Eclipse Foundation, responsible for open source projects. And we thought it's about time to, the idea of this talk today is basically just help you guys getting started when you have questions about contributing to an open source project.
So for most organizations, is this on?
This is not on.
This is not on. So, is this on? Okay. This is a graph or chart made by a school of business that was talking about adoption of open source technologies. Most organizations go through this pattern where they start off as an organization that does not use open source. At least the management doesn't think so. But usually, some open source software is sneaking in at the bottom. We've found, and we've experienced this over quite a number of years, organizations progressing from the point of denying that they use open source right up to the point where they've made a strategic investment. And it goes through different stages where we start using open source, we start making minor contributions to open source projects, to actual participation in open source projects, right on to full ownership of open source projects and leadership within those projects. And then, as I said earlier, making a strategic bet on open source. So if you have products that depend on open source, it is in your strategic best interests to contribute to those open source projects and make sure that they stay viable.
Right. So, and one thing that probably a lot of you already know is there's many different places out there in the internet where open source actually happens. Happens in a way that a bunch of people collaborate, work together on a particular open source project. And those places can be simple communities which provide nothing but infrastructure for hosting projects, such as GitHub, for example, but it can also be foundations, like the Eclipse Foundation or the Apache Software Foundation, which not just provide infrastructure, but also provide process and rules and tools that help you do open source development. Linux Foundation is another example, right? They also have, like Linux Foundation also have actually developers on staff to work on open source, like on really important open source projects.
Yes, open source does take a number of different forms. One of the things that we at the Eclipse Foundation do, the Apache Foundation does this as well, is that they own the project on behalf of the community, which prevents any single vendor from dominating a particular project. That's just one of the factors to consider. When you are considering doing an engagement in open source, I guess the first thing, most obvious thing, is to actually connect with the community. Find out where the community lives and where they do their communication, and just join in on that communication. That may be in a GitHub repository, that may be on a Google Groups mailing list or more traditional mailing list. Apache and Eclipse Foundation use kind of the more traditional mailing lists, for example. But just connect with the community, find out what their values are, find out what their plans are, and work out how you can integrate with those plans.
And a very, very first step actually is in connecting with the community. If you help other users, that can be users within your company, that can be users within a local area, a user group, that can be users on Stack Overflow, on a forum, on a mailing list, whatever. Whenever you see, because like as a user, when you start with a technology, with a project, with a product, whatever it is, you do have questions. And once you gain experience, you actually have answers to those questions. And by helping others, that already is a very valuable contribution in any open source project, because it helps engaging and building communities.
Reporting problems is another great way to start working with an open source community. Not out of a massive user community. Well, I'm familiar most with the Eclipse community, of course. Out of our massive community of adopters of the Eclipse IDE technology, only a small fraction of them actually have opened up or created accounts and have created bug reports. Creating bug reports is an important part for any kind of software development, and especially open source. If we don't know about the problems, then we can't really do anything about it. This picture here is, if you're reporting a problem with with the product that you've been working with, being as specific as possible, providing a graphic. In this case, the person who created the bug report actually drew some arrows on it to indicate where. Help the people triaging the bug understand what the problem is. I'm not sure that I would have put "don't" in it if it were up to me. I tend to try and treat the people I'm talking to as nicely as possible because I'd like them to engage. Not really directly related to the picture, though. Don't report bugs over Twitter. That's just not useful to anybody. If you're going to report a bug, reporting it through the channels that the project specifies is going to have the most likely best results.
Another thing you can do is like go out to user groups, go out to conferences and talk about the project, talk about technology, and it's the same, like it's another extension to the way of helping users is actually going out and tell others about the project, right? And evangelize or spread the word and make sure that people are educated about a specific project or even be aware of the project technology, how to use it and how to translate it into, let's say, successful products in their companies or even businesses sometimes, right?
Participate in discussions. Most open source, there's lots of different rules, as Gunnar said earlier, lots of different ways that open source organizations work. Generally, though, everybody has discussions. Sometimes we have the notions of transparency and openness in open source projects. Transparency is basically a project team letting you know what they are doing, and that's pretty valuable. If a project is operating in an open way, though, they invite you to participate. We at the Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation is good at this. Most of the Linux Foundation's projects work like this as well. Openness to participation from others. So look for that in a project. Some projects just aren't interested in your input, and maybe engaging with them might be a waste of cycles. But certainly try to participate in those discussions, and if again, a good way of knowing if it's something worth investing in is if those discussions work two ways.
And when you get to the point to actually start contributing code to a project, which is like another level on working with open source or within the open source community, is also be sure to look out for things like coding conventions or rules or policies that a project might have set, right? It's very likely that you can change code formatting in a specific open source project with your very first commit. That actually requires a more deep engagement with the committers and some discussions. And however, it is possible, right? One project I worked with, like there were several contributors showing up and then just asking if it's possible to change a setting here or there to make it like, because there's some, and they also had some very good arguments, so the project decided, okay, let's do it, right? And also, if you start with small bug fixes, that's usually very easier because it keeps the amount of code change low. Keep in mind that when you submit a chunk of code and it's large, then the developers of that project need to have like some dedicated time that they need to set aside to review the code, and in order to accept that. Sometimes even developers want to have some confidence in that it's not just a drop that you're doing, but like also have an interest in maintaining that code or that new functionality, right? And sometimes they like to have an opinion on certain design of the implementation. So it's actually quite good, like if you're thinking about contributing a larger functionality, go out on the mailing list first or to the developer and talk before you start throwing the code over. Because that, in the end, it might save some time for you. Oh, and also like the next slide, if you're working like with third-party libraries, there might be certain IP rights that you have to.
Certainly, if you're contributing to an open source project, pay attention to intellectual property management, how the project takes care of that sort of thing. At a minimum, you probably would be required by a project that's thinking about things, you probably require some kind of contributor agreement where you indicate what rights you are giving to use the code that you contribute. Something that a lot of people don't understand or miss is that very often when you contribute code, you give away your rights to those contributions. Not everybody works that way, though. Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation, you actually retain the rights to the contributions you make. You're just licensing that code to the project team to use. Anyway, I could talk a long time about licensing and intellectual property, but I won't do that. Anyway, just keep in mind that there's probably a process. There's probably some intellectual property management. If there's not, then chances are the project will have some trouble with commercial adoption, or adoption really by anybody who cares about intellectual property management. With that, I think we're just, yeah, so the final advice is just do it. If you're interested in contributing to an open source project, get started. Good ones will help you. We have a saying at Eclipse, kill with kindness. If somebody shows up, it's the project team's job to overwhelm you with help. And if they don't do that, my email address is wayne@eclipse.org, and I'll sort them out. Anyway, that's all of our time. Thank you for your attention. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.